Richi Sunak sat down for a set-piece interview with Laura Kuenssberg this weekend, and the interview had two standout moments. One of them concerned Richi Sunak's fight against what he calls the war on motorists. Now, that fight includes the suggestion that Sunak would block new 20-mile-per-hour zones in neighbourhoods. Kuenssberg inquired what that would mean in practice.
I want to be really clear about what you're actually proposing. Will you stop councils, whether they're Conservative, Labour or any colour of the rainbow, will you stop them introducing 20-mile-an-hour zones as a default? Because that's really what's at stake here. You can complain about it, as lots of our viewers might do, but are you going to stop it happening? Because if you don't, then it's just rhetoric, isn't it?
No, what this is about is making sure that the statutory guidance that goes to local councils from government is clear about making sure that councils, which are obviously in charge of what's happening in their local areas, are doing things with the support and consent of their local community.
Richi Sunak, his big pitch was, I'm going to stop the war on motorists, which I think he's kind of made up, to be honest. But his big pitch was, I'm going to stand in the way of 20-mile-hour speed limit zones, right? Always a bad policy. Low speed limits do encourage cycling on the roads. They are much safer for kids crossing the roads. I personally think we should have, roads being much more public space than they are. I think it'd be good if parents could relax when their kids go out to play instead of worrying that they're going to get run down by a car, right? So 20-mile-an-hour zones, very, very good. But his pitch was he would block it to save the driver. Now he's admitted we can't even block it. It is up to local councils. So what was it? That was literally just a press release. Like, you're the Prime Minister. If you're a leader of the opposition, if you're a campaigner, you can do press releases and make a big deal out of them. If you're the Prime Minister, your big pitch to the electorate shouldn't be messaging, right? You need to have something behind it. Let's look at the other memorable moment from that interview.
You mentioned there you feel you've got a good sense of where the public's at. Let's look at what the public associates with you and we asked them. Now, we did this with Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader. We'll do it again with Keir Starmer. We're using what's called a word cloud, asking people what they associate a leader with. And we can show our viewers that with this morning. Now, you can see there, rightly or wrongly, what many people associate with you is your personal wealth. What does that make you think? Does that worry you if people might feel you're out of touch? Or perhaps, you are very wealthy. You could be living on a beach, not working at all. A lot of people might think, well, you've got all this wealth, you could do anything. Good on you for being in public service. But what goes through your mind when you see that?
My job is to deliver for people. And that's why we've just been talking a lot about this net zero decision, which I've made.
I think people would really like to know what your response is. We've talked about the net zero target a lot.
But this is a great example of it. That is a decision which was motivated by me wanting to ease the burden on families.
So on your view on this, in those early years of Cameron and Osborne, there was a real attempt, I think, by sort of the Labour Party and the Mirror and sort of people on the left, essentially, to say these are posh boys running Britain in their own interests. And it didn't really seem to catch on very much. People didn't seem to mind that much that these were all people who went to Eton or wherever. With Richi Sunak, for some reason, his wealth does seem to have, stuck in people's craw a little bit more. They do think of him as a very rich guy, and that's the first thing that comes to mind when they're asked about him. I mean, why has Rishi Rich stuck a bit better than talking about David Cameron as Eton posh boy?
I think there's a couple of reasons why. I mean, if you cast your mind back to the early years of David Cameron's leadership of the Conservative Party, he really tried to rebrand as middle class. Now, there was a massive PR blitz around this. He didn't want to be known as Mr. Bullingdon Club, Mr. Eton. He tried to brand himself as a Bowden dad. Now, I didn't know what Bowden was until this, period in British politics. It's a posh catalogue, all right? It's like Little Woods for the Ocado set. And it was kind of effective. And he was sort of able to do this posho in middle-class clothing act because he was able to, I think, tap into something which was aspirational about middle-class people. It was saying, you're a bit posh, but you could be a little bit posher, but I'm not crazy out of touch. I'm not a brand of paint you've never heard of. I'm Farrow and Ball. You can get it in being cute, but it's a little bit posher than your average paint. I think Richi Sunak, both from that sense of, here's a real PR project to show you who I am, He doesn't really have that anymore. He did have that when he was this anti-Johnson figure, right? When he was sort of seen as perhaps a sensible alternative. He was the Chancellor of the Exchequer. He was building up a kind of, different pole of attraction. But I think because the Conservatives have royally fucked it, and also I think that the composition of his team has changed, he's much less able to pull that off. Now he's the one that's carrying the can. I think that when it comes to his political positioning, he's a far less talented politician than David Cameron. Now that's not saying much. David Cameron famously was, slammed by Barack Obama for being a lightweight. But Rishi Sunak, he's Cameron without the focus groups, right? There's nothing below the surface, but there's almost nothing on the surface either.